Hello, my friends. So today I have an article reading for you titled Timeline of the New World Order from thultide.wordpress.com. Thultide is not the original author of this timeline. However, I am reading the version reprinted by him on his blog because I think Thultide has a lot of really great content on his WordPress, and I hope you'll check him out. This type of research, this type of compilation of a timeline, I think is important for anybody to be familiar with because it helps us to visualize the process, the long-standing, centuries-long planning and effort that has gone into bringing the world into the position that it is in today of internationalism, globalism, and many of the other modern elements that people think just happened spontaneously or happened as a result of some kind of abstract process, social process, or economic process, or any other type of abstraction that you can imagine. We have to recognize that there were people and groups that for centuries now have put these plans into writing and taken a lot of effort and resources to actually materialize these plans, and that the current state of affairs has a long-standing continuity going back centuries, and that it wasn't just accidental, it wasn't just a process of abstract social forces, it was the result of intentional planning by powerful people, and this is the way that you can show that this is the case, by creating this kind of timeline. So, without further ado, I present to you Timeline of the New World Order. Let us begin. Thultide begins with his own introduction here. I'm in the process of writing a comprehensive summary of the New World Order. It'll provide an introduction to what exactly the New World Order is, its origin, and its main attributes, metaphysical or religious, political, economic, and technological. There are some good resources on this subject floating around the internet, but many are dated, scattered, or don't paint a full picture. So my aim is to consolidate everything into one or two articles and lay everything out as plainly as possible. Anyway, the article below was originally published on a Catholic Patriot website named Michael. It's a relatively comprehensive timeline of the history of the New World Order, starting at the beginning-ish of the New World Order conspiracy. It misses some important context, such as Sabbatean Frankism. But other than that, it's a great summary, featuring most of the important figures and events. My article will be superior, obviously, but this article is worth sharing and preserving, and I'm sure somebody will find it useful. I'm copying it over word for word, quoting below the line. A History of the New World Order, Part 1. 1773. Mayer Amschel Rothschild. Mayer Amschel Rothschild assembles 12 of his most influential friends and convinces them that if they all pool their resources together, they can rule the world. This meeting takes place in Frankfurt, Germany. Rothschild also informs his friends that he has found the perfect candidate, an individual of incredible intellect and ingenuity, to lead the organization he has planned, Adam Weishaupt. May 1st, 1776, Adam Weishaupt. Adam Weishaupt, codenamed Spartacus, establishes a secret society called the Order of the Illuminati. Weishaupt is the professor of canon law at the University of Ingolstadt in Bavaria, part of Germany. The Illuminati seek to establish a new world order. Their objectives are as follows. 1. Abolition of all ordered governments. 2. Abolition of private property. 3. Abolition of inheritance. 4. Abolition of patriotism. 5. Abolition of the family. 6. Abolition of religion. And 7. Creation of a world government. July 1782. The Order of the Illuminati. The Order of the Illuminati joins forces with Freemasonry at the Congress of Wilhelmsbad. The Comte de Verrue, an attendant at the conference, comes away visibly shaken. When questioned about the tragic secrets he brought back with him, he replies, quote, "I will not confide them to you. I can only tell you that all this is very much more serious than you think." End quote. From this time on, according to his biographer, the Comte de Verrue could only speak of Freemasonry with horror. The insignia of the Order of the Illuminati first appeared on the reverse side of the U.S. $1 bill in 1933. One can read at the base of the 13-story pyramid, the year 1776. The eye radiating in all directions is the all-spying eye. That symbolizes the terroristic, Gestapo-like agency set up by Weishaupt. The Latin words "annuit coeptis" mean our enterprise, conspiracy, has been crowned with success. Below, Novus Ordo Seclorum explains the nature of the enterprise, a new social order, or a new world order. 1785. Detailed plan of the French Revolution found. An Illuminati courier named Lanz is struck by lightning and killed while traveling by horseback through the town of Ratisbon. When Bavarian officials examine the contents of his saddlebags, they discover the existence of the Order of the Illuminati and find plans detailing the coming French Revolution. The Bavarian government attempts to alert the government of France of impending disaster, but the French government fails to heed this warning. Bavarian officials arrest all members of the Illuminati they can find, but Weishaupt and others have gone underground and cannot be found. 1796. Freemasonry. Freemasonry becomes a major issue in the presidential election in the United States. John Adams wins the election by opposing Masonry, and his son John Quincy Adams warns of the dire threat to the nation posed by the Masonic lodges. Quote, "I do not conscientiously and sincerely believe that the order of Freemasonry, if not the greatest, is one of the greatest moral and political evils under which the Union is now laboring." 1797. John Robison. John Robison, professor of natural history at Edinburgh University in Scotland, publishes a book titled Proofs of a Conspiracy, in which he reveals that Adam Weishaupt had attempted to recruit him. He exposes the diabolical aims of the Illuminati to the world. 1821. Georg W. F. Hegel. Georg W. F. Hegel formulates what is called the Hegelian dialectic, the process by which the Illuminati objectives are achieved. According to the Hegelian dialectic, thesis plus antithesis equals synthesis. In other words, first you foment a crisis. Then there is an enormous public outcry that something must be done about the problem. So you offer a solution that brings about the changes you really wanted all along, but which people would have been unwilling to accept initially. 1828. Mayer Amschel Rothschild. Mayer Amschel Rothschild, who finances the Illuminati, expresses his utter contempt for national governments, which attempt to regulate international bankers such as him. Quote, "Allow me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who writes the laws." 1848. Moses Mordecai Marx Levi. Moses Mordecai Marx Levi, alias Karl Marx, writes the Communist Manifesto. Marx is a member of an Illuminati front organization called the League of the Just. He not only advocates economic and political changes, he advocates moral and spiritual changes as well. He believes the family should be abolished, and that all children should be raised by a central authority. He expresses his attitude toward God by saying, quote, "We must war against all prevailing ideas of religion, of the state, of country, of patriotism. The idea of God is the keynote of a perverted civilization. It must be destroyed." January 22nd, 1870. Albert Pike. In a letter to Italian revolutionary leader Giuseppe Mazzini, Albert Pike, sovereign grand commander of the southern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, announces the establishment of a secret society within a secret society. Quote, "We must create a super rite, which will remain unknown, to which we will call those Masons of a high degree of whom we shall select. With regard to our brothers in Masonry, these men must be pledges to the strictest secrecy. Through this supreme rite, we will govern all Freemasonry, which will become the one international center, the more powerful because its direction will be unknown." This ultra-secret organization is called the New and Reformed Palladian Rite. This is why about 95% of the men involved in Masonry don't have a clue as to what the objectives of the organization actually are. They are under the delusion that it's just a fine community organization doing good works. 1875. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. Russian occultist Helena Petrovna Blavatsky founds the Theosophical Society. Madame Blavatsky claims that Tibetan holy men in the Himalayas, whom she refers to as the Masters of Wisdom, communicated with her in London by telepathy. She insists that the Christians have it all backwards, that Satan is good and God is evil. She writes, quote, "The Christians and scientists must be made to respect their Indian betters. The wisdom of India, her philosophy and achievement must be made known in Europe and America." 1884. The Fabian Society. The Fabian Society is founded in Great Britain to promote socialism. The Fabian Society takes its name from the Roman general Fabius Maximus, who fought Hannibal's army in small, debilitating skirmishes rather than attempting one decisive battle. July 14th, 1889. Albert Pike reveals who is the true object of Masonic worship. Albert Pike issues instructions to the 23 Supreme Councils of the world on July 14th, 1889. He reveals who is the true object of Masonic worship. Quote, "To you, sovereign grand instructors general, we say this, that you may repeat it to the brethren of the 32nd, 31st, and 30th degrees. The Masonic religion should be, by all of us initiates of the high degrees, maintained in the purity of the Luciferian doctrine." 1890 to 1896. Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes, an enthusiastic student of John Ruskin, is Prime Minister of South Africa, a British colony at the time. He is able to exploit and control the gold and diamond wealth of South Africa. He works to bring all the habitable portions of the world under the dominion of a ruling elite. To that end, he uses a portion of his vast wealth to establish the famous Rhodes Scholarship. 1893. Parliament of World Religions, held in Chicago. The Theosophical Society sponsors a Parliament of World Religions, held in Chicago. The purpose of the convention is to introduce Hindu and Buddhist concepts, such as belief in reincarnation, to the West. 1911. The Socialist Party of Great Britain publishes Socialism and Religion. The Socialist Party of Great Britain publishes a pamphlet entitled Socialism and Religion, in which they clearly state their position on Christianity. Quote, "It is therefore a profound truth that socialism is the natural enemy of religion. A Christian socialist is, in fact, an anti-socialist. Christianity is the antithesis of socialism." 1912. Colonel Edward Mandell House. Colonel Edward Mandell House, a close advisor of President Woodrow Wilson, publishes Philip Drew, Administrator, in which he promotes socialism as dreamed of by Karl Marx. February 3rd, 1913, the 16th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The 16th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, making it possible for the federal government to impose a progressive income tax, is ratified. Plank number 2 of the Communist Manifesto had called for a progressive income tax. In Canada, the income tax is introduced in 1917 as a temporary measure to finance the war effort. 1913. President Woodrow Wilson. President Woodrow Wilson publishes The New Freedom, in which he reveals, quote, "Since I entered politics, I have chiefly had men's views confided to me privately. Some of the biggest men in the U.S., in the field of commerce and manufacturing, are afraid of somebody, are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it." December 23rd, 1913. The Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, neither federal nor a reserve, it's a privately owned institution, is created. It was planned at a secret meeting in 1910 on Jekyll Island, Georgia, by a group of bankers and politicians, including Colonel House. This transfers the power to create money from the American government to a private group of bankers. The Federal Reserve Act is hastily passed just before the Christmas break. Congressman Charles A. Lindbergh Sr., father of the famed aviator, warns, quote, "This act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the president signs this act, the invisible government by the money power proven to exist by the money trust investigation will be legalized." 1916. President Woodrow Wilson observes, 3 years after signing the Federal Reserve Act into law, President Woodrow Wilson observes, quote, "I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men." 1917. Vladimir I. Lenin. With the aid from financiers in New York City and London, V.I. Lenin is able to overthrow the government of Russia. Lenin later comments on the apparent contradiction of the links between prominent capitalists and communism. Quote, "There also exists another alliance, at first glance a strange one, a surprising one. But if you think about it, in fact, one which is well grounded and easy to understand. This is the alliance between our communist leaders and your capitalists." Remember the Hegelian dialectic? May 30th, 1919. The Royal Institute of International Affairs. Prominent British and American personalities establish the Royal Institute of International Affairs in England and the Institute of International Affairs in the United States at a meeting arranged by Colonel House, attended by various Fabian socialists, including noted economist John Maynard Keynes. 1920. Winston Churchill. Britain's Winston Churchill recognizes the connection between the Illuminati and the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. He observes, quote, "From the days of Spartacus Weishaupt to those of Karl Marx to those of Trotsky, Bela Kun, Rosa Luxemburg, and Emma Goldman, this worldwide conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization and for the reconstitution of society on the basis of arrested development, of envious malevolence and impossible equality, has been steadily growing. It played a definitely recognizable role in the tragedy of the French Revolution. It has been the mainspring of every subversive movement during the 19th century. And now, at last, this band of extraordinary personalities from the underworld of the great cities of Europe and America have gripped the Russian people by the hair of their heads and have become practically the undisputed masters of that enormous empire." 1920 to 1931. Louis T. McFadden. Louis T. McFadden is chairman of the House Committee on Banking and Currency. Concerning the Federal Reserve, Congressman McFadden notes, quote, "When the Federal Reserve Act was passed, the people of these United States did not perceive that a world banking system was being set up here. A superstate controlled by international bankers and international industrialists acting together to enslave the world for their own pleasure. Every effort has been made by the Fed to conceal its powers, but the truth is, the Fed has usurped the government. It controls everything here, and it controls all our foreign relations. It makes and breaks governments at will." Concerning the Great Depression and the country's acceptance of FDR's New Deal, he asserts, quote, "It was no accident. It was a carefully contrived occurrence. The international bankers sought to bring about a condition of despair here so they might emerge as the rulers of us all." 1921. Council on Foreign Relations, CFR. Colonel House reorganizes the American branch of the Institute of International Affairs into the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR. For the past 60 years, 80% of the top positions in every administration, whether Democrat or Republican, have been occupied by members of this organization. December 15th, 1922. The CFR endorses world government. The CFR endorses world government in its magazine Foreign Affairs. Author Philip Kerr states in From Empire to Commonwealth, quote, "Obviously there is going to be no peace nor prosperity for mankind as long as the earth remains divided into 50 or 60 independent states, until some kind of international system is created. The real problem today is that of world government." A History of the New World Order, Part 2. 1928. The Open Conspiracy, Blueprints for a World Revolution, by H.G. Wells. The Open Conspiracy, Blueprints for a World Revolution by H.G. Wells is published. A former Fabian socialist, Wells writes, quote, "The political world of the open conspiracy must be weakened." Let me start that again. The political world of the open conspiracy must weaken, efface, incorporate, and supersede existing governments. The open conspiracy is the natural inheritor of socialist and communist enthusiasms. It may be in control of Moscow before it is in control of New York. The character of the open conspiracy will now be plainly displayed. It will be a world religion. 1933. The Shape of Things to Come by H.G. Wells. The Shape of Things to Come by H.G. Wells is published. Wells predicts a Second World War around 1940, originating from a German-Polish dispute. After 1945, there would be an increasing lack of public safety in criminally infected areas. The plan for the modern world state would succeed in its third attempt and come out of something that occurred in Basra, Iraq. The book also states, quote, "Although world government has been plainly coming for some years, although it had been endlessly feared and murmured against, it found no opposition anywhere." November 21st, 1933, Franklin Roosevelt. In a letter to Colonel Edward M. House, Franklin Roosevelt writes, quote, "The real truth of the matter is, as you know, and I know, that a financial element in the larger centers has owned the government since the days of Andrew Jackson." March 1942, Federal Council of Churches. An article in Time magazine chronicles the Federal Council of Churches, which later becomes the National Council of Churches, a part of the World Council of Churches, lending its weight to efforts to establish a global authority. A meeting of the top officials of the council come out in favor of 1. A world government of delegated powers, 2. Strong immediate limitations on national sovereignty, and 3. International control of all armies and navies. Representatives, 375 of them, and of some 30-some denominations, assert that, quote, a new order of economic life is both imminent and imperative. A new order that is sure to come either, quote, through voluntary cooperation within the framework of democracy or through explosive revolution. June 28, 1945. President Harry Truman. United States President Harry Truman endorses world government in a speech, quote, "It will be just as easy for nations to get along in a republic of the world as it is for us to get along in a republic of the United States." October 24th, 1945. United Nations Charter. The United Nations Charter becomes effective. Also, on October 24th, Senator Glenn Taylor, Democrat from Idaho, introduces Senate Resolution 183, calling upon the United States Senate to go on record as favoring the creation of a world republic, including an international police force. February 7th, 1950, James Warburg. International financier and CFR member James Warburg tells a Senate Foreign Relations Subcommittee, quote, "We shall have world government whether you like it or not, by conquest or consent." February 9th, 1950, Resolution number 66. The Senate Foreign Relations Subcommittee introduces Senate Concurrent Resolution number 66, which begins, quote, "Whereas, in order to achieve universal peace and justice, the present Charter of the United Nations should be changed to provide a true world government constitution. 1952. World Association of Parliamentarians for a World Government. The World Associations of Parliamentarians for World Government draws up a map designed to illustrate how foreign troops would occupy and police the 6 regions into which the United States and Canada will be divided as part of their world government plan. 1954. Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands establishes the Bilderbergers. Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands establishes the Bilderbergers, international politicians and bankers who secretly meet on an annual basis. 1961. U.S. State Department issues document 7277. The U.S. State Department issues document 7277, entitled, quote, Freedom from War, the U.S. Program for General and Complete Disarmament in a Peaceful World. It details a 3-stage plan to disarm all nations and arm the UN, with the final stage in which, quote, no state would have the military power to challenge the progressively strengthened UN peace force. 1966. Tragedy and Hope by Carroll Quigley. Professor Carroll Quigley, Bill Clinton's mentor at Georgetown University, authors a massive volume entitled Tragedy and Hope, in which he states, quote, there does exist and has existed for a generation an international network which operates, to some extent, in the way the radical right believes the communists act. In fact, this network, which we may identify as the Round Table Groups, has no aversion to cooperating with the communists or any other groups, and frequently does so. I know of the operations of this network because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. I have no aversion to it or to most of its aims, and have, for much of my life, been close to it and to many of its instruments. I have objected, both in the past and recently, to a few of its policies, but in general, my chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown, and I believe its role in history is significant enough to be known. April 1972. Chester M. Pierce. In his keynote address to the Association for Childhood Education International, Chester M. Pierce, professor of education and psychiatry in the Faculty of Medicine at Harvard University, proclaims, quote, every child in America entering school at the age of 5 is insane because he comes to school with certain allegiances toward our founding fathers, toward his parents, toward a belief in a supernatural being. It's up to you, teachers, to make all of these sick children well by creating the international child of the future. July 1973. The Trilateral Commission. International banker and staunch member of the subversive Council on Foreign Relations, David Rockefeller, founds a new organization, the Trilateral Commission, of which the official aim is to, quote, harmonize the political, economic, social, and cultural relations between the 3 major economic regions in the world, hence the name Trilateral. He invites future President Jimmy Carter to become one of the founding members. Zbigniew Brzezinski is the organization's first director. There are 3 major economic areas in the world: Europe, North America, and the Far East. If, under the pretext of having to join forces to be able to face economic competition with the other 2 economic regions, the member countries of each of these 3 regions decide to merge into one single country, forming 3 superstates, then the one world government will be almost achieved. Like Fabian socialists, they achieve their ultimate goal, a world government, step by step. This aim is almost achieved in Europe, with the Single European Act, Maastricht Treaty, that was implemented in 1993, requiring all the member countries of the European Community to abolish their trade barriers and to hand over their monetary and fiscal policies to the technocrats of the European Commission in Brussels, Belgium. In January 2002, all these European countries abandoned their national currencies to share only one common currency, the euro. Moreover, the Nice Treaty removed more powers from countries to give them over to the European Commission. What begun innocently in 1952 as the EEC, the European Economic Community, a common authority to regulate the coal and steel industry among European nations, finally turned into a European superstate. Jean Monnet, a French socialist economist and founder of the EEC, had this in mind when he said, quote, "Political union inevitably follows economic union." He also said in 1948, quote, "The creation of a united Europe must be regarded as an essential step toward the creation of a united world." As regards the North American area, the merger of its member countries is well underway with the passage of free trade between Canada and the USA and then Mexico. In the next few years, this free trade agreement is supposed to include all of South and Central America, with a single currency for them all. Mexico's President Vicente Fox said on May 6, 2002 in Madrid, quote, "Eventually our long-range objective is to establish with the United States, but also with Canada, our other regional partner, an ensemble of connections and institutions similar to those created by the European Union." 1973. The world divided into 10 kingdoms. The Club of Rome, a UN operative, issues a report entitled Regionalized and Adaptive Model of the Global World System. This report divides the entire world into 10 kingdoms. 1973 report is missing from the original website. 1979. FEMA. FEMA, which stands for the Federal Emergency Management Agency, is given huge powers. It has the power, in case of national emergency, to suspend laws, move entire populations, arrest and detain citizens without a warrant, and hold them without a trial. It can seize property, food supplies, transportation systems, and can suspend the Constitution. Not only is it the most powerful entity in the United States, but it was not even created under constitutional law by the Congress. It was a product of a presidential executive order. An executive order becomes law simply by a signature of the United States President. It does not even have to be approved by the representatives or senators in the Congress. A state of national emergency could be a terrorist attack, a natural disaster, or a stock market crash, for example. Here are just a few executive orders associated with FEMA that would suspend the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. These executive orders have been on record for nearly 30 years and could be enacted by the stroke of a presidential pen. 10995. Right to seize all communications media in the United States. 10997. Right to seize all electric power, fuels, and minerals, both public and private. Right to seize all means of transportation, including personal vehicles of any kind, and total control of highways, seaports, and waterways. Right to seize any and all American people, and divide up families in order to create workforces to be transferred to any place that the government sees fit. Right to seize all health, education, and welfare facilities, both public and private. Right to force registration of all men, women, and children in the United States. Right to seize all airspace, airports, and aircraft. right to seize all housing and finance authorities in order to establish relocation designation areas, and to force abandonment of areas classified as unsafe. Right to seize all railroads, inland waterways, and storage facilities, both public and private. Authorizes plans to establish government control of wages and salaries, credit, and the flow of money in U.S. financial institutions. 1991. George Bush Sr. praises the New World Order.
Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order, can emerge, a new era, freer from the threat of terror, stronger in the pursuit of justice, and more secure in the quest for peace. An era in which the nations of the world, East and West, North and South, can prosper and live in harmony. 100 generations have searched for this elusive path to peace, while 1,000 wars raged across the span of human endeavor. And today that new world is struggling to be born. A world quite different from the one we've known. A world where the rule of law supplants the rule of the jungle. A world in which nations recognize the shared responsibility for freedom and justice. A world where the strong respect the rights of the weak. We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order. A world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders. What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order, where diverse nations are drawn together in common cause to achieve the universal aspirations of mankind: peace and security, freedom, and the rule of law. Such is a world worthy of our struggle and worthy of our children's future. Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order. In the words of Winston Churchill, a world order in which the principles of justice and fair play protect the weak against the strong. A world where the United Nations, freed from Cold War stalemate, is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
President George Bush Sr., father of the current U.S. president, praises the New World Order in a State of the Union message. Quote, "What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order, to achieve the universal aspirations of mankind, based on shared principles and the rule of law, the illumination of 1,000 points of light. The winds of change are with us now." Theosophist Alice Bailey used the very same expression, points of light, in describing the process of occult enlightenment. June 1991, Bilderberg Society in Baden-Baden, Germany. World leaders are gathered for another closed-door meeting of the Bilderberg Society in Baden-Baden, Germany. While at that meeting, David Rockefeller said in a speech, quote, "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march toward a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries. October 29th, 1991, David Funderburk. David Funderburk, former U.S. ambassador to Romania, tells a North Carolina audience, quote, "George Bush has been surrounding himself with people who believe in a one-world government. They believe that the Soviet system and the American system are converging." May 21st, 1992, Henry Kissinger. In an address to the Bilderberger Organization meeting in Evian, France, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger declares, quote, "Today, Americans would be outraged if UN troops entered Los Angeles to restore order. Tomorrow, they will be grateful. This is especially true if they were told there was an outside threat from beyond, whether real or promulgated, that threatened our very existence. It is then that all peoples of the world will plead with world leaders to deliver them from this evil. The one thing every man fears is the unknown. When presented with this scenario, individual rights will be willingly relinquished for the guarantee of their well-being granted to them by their world government." July 20th, 1992. The Birth of the Global Nation by Strobe Talbot. Time magazine publishes The Birth of the Global Nation by Strobe Talbot, Rhodes Scholar, roommate of Bill Clinton at Oxford University, CFR director and trilateralist, and appointed Deputy Secretary of State by President Clinton, in which he writes, quote, "Nationhood as we know it will be obsolete. All states will recognize a single global authority. All countries are basically social arrangements. No matter how permanent or even sacred they may seem at one time, in fact, they are all artificial and temporary. Perhaps national sovereignty wasn't such a great idea after all, but it has taken the events in our world wondrous and terrible but it has taken the events of our own wondrous and terrible century to clinch the case for the world government." (1993) Second Parliament of World Religions. A second Parliament of World Religions is held in Chicago on the 100th anniversary of the first. Like the first convention, this one seeks to join all the religions of the world into one harmonious whole, but it wants to make them, quote, "merge back into their original element." Traditional beliefs of monotheistic religions, such as Christianity, are considered incompatible with individual enlightenment and must be drastically altered. July 18th, 1993, NAFTA. CFR member and trilateralist Henry Kissinger writes in the Los Angeles Times concerning NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, quote, "What Congress will have before it is not a conventional trade agreement, but the architecture of a new international system, a first step toward a new world order." 1994, Global Governance for the 21st Century. In the Human Development Report, published by the UN Development Program, there was a section called, quote, "Global Governance for the 21st Century," on page 88. The administrator of this program was appointed by Bill Clinton. His name is James Gustav Speth. The opening sentence of the report said, "Mankind's problems can no longer be solved by national government. What is needed is a world government. This can best be achieved by strengthening the United Nations system." May 3rd, 1994. Bill Clinton signs Presidential Decision Directive 25. President Bill Clinton signs Presidential Decision Directive 25 and then declares it classified so the American people can't see what it says. The summary of PDD 25 issued to members of Congress tells us that it authorizes the president to turn over control of the U.S. military units to the UN command. September 23rd, 1994, more people begin to wake up. The globalists realize that more and more people begin to wake up to what's going on. They have only a limited amount of time in which to implement their policies. Speaking at the United Nations Ambassadors' Dinner, David Rockefeller remarks, quote, "This present window of opportunity, during which a truly peaceful and interdependent world order might be built, will not be open for too long. We are on the verge of a global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis, and the nations will accept the new world order." March 1995, global taxes. UN delegates meet at the World Summit for Social Development in Copenhagen, Denmark, to discuss various methods for imposing global taxes on the people of the world. September 1995, HARP. Popular Science magazine describes a top-secret U.S. Navy installation called HARP, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, in the state of Alaska. This project beams powerful radio energy into the Earth's upper atmosphere. One of the goals of the program is to develop the capability of manipulating local weather, using the techniques developed by Bernard Eastlund. The program has been underway since 1990. September 27th, 1995, State of the World Forum. The State of the World Forum took place in the fall of this year, sponsored by the Gorbachev Foundation, located at the Presidio in San Francisco. Foundation President Jim Garrison chairs the meeting of who's who from around the world, including Margaret Thatcher, Maurice Strong, George Bush, Mikhail Gorbachev, and others. Conversation centers around the oneness of mankind and the coming global government. However, since the term global governance is now used in place of New World Order, since the latter has become a political liability, becoming a lightning rod for opponents of global government. 1996, Our Global Neighborhood. The United Nations 420-page report, Our Global Neighborhood, is published. It outlines a plan for global governance, calling for an international conference on global governance. In 1998, for the purpose of submitting to the world the necessary treaties and agreements for ratification by the year 2000. 2003, State of Emergency. The world is on the verge of another global war. The state of emergency looked for by the one-worlders to impose martial law and the universal microchip under the skin. But with God's help, they will not have the last word. And that concludes the timeline of the New World Order. Thank you for watching.